So, what I'd like to talk about today is business architecture and the role that business architecture should and can play successfully in strategy execution. So, I'm not sure where the blueprints came from. That wasn't my topic, but this is the topic. So, what I'd like to talk about today, I'm going to talk a little bit about strategy, alignment, and execution, and some of the traditional thinking around strategy, alignment, and execution. And I'm going to poke some holes in it and talk about some more contemporary thinking around strategy, alignment, and execution. And then the role that business architecture should play in the successful execution of strategy in the organization. Also going to talk about portfolio management as a necessary component and integration with enterprise-wide business architecture for successful strategy execution. Talk a little bit about business architecture as a facilitator for innovation, particularly internal innovation, and then the importance of a good value measurement program for all of this. So that's a lot. I'm going to go through a lot of material quickly and then allow some time for Q&A at the end. So let's get started. So with alignment and execution, let's start with a Dilbert cartoon. I think we all feel we live in a Dilbert cartoon at times. I know I sure do. And I like this one in particular because I think it illustrates the fact that we all want to feel that what we do aligns with the strategy of the business. And we all want to feel that everything we do supports the strategy of the business at that time. But the realities are very few of us even know what the strategy is of our organizations at a given period of time. And I'm going to come back to that thought in a second. So Michael Porter, very famous author, consultant, academic, studies many thousands and thousands of organizations, found that more than 80% of organizations do not successfully execute their business strategies. And that's not because of that the strategy itself was necessarily flawed, but in most cases, it's because of bad execution. So it's not that the strategy development process is necessarily broken, but the strategy execution process definitely is either broken or not functioning very well in most organizations today. Porter and others see this failure to execute as one of the most significant management challenges that all organizations are facing today. So we'll add to this a little bit, kind of set the stage for the current state of things. I'm sure you've all have seen statistics like this. They vary depending on which analyst firm's presenting them, but a high percentage of IT projects either fail outright or fail to achieve many of the desired business objectives. So it's not surprising that many in business cite a lack of IT business alignment as a major contributing factor to poor strategy execution. So we've been conditioned over the last few decades to believe that business IT alignment is our holy grail, that it is possible to directly align business strategy with IT strategy, and that should be our goal. However, most organizations today are no better aligned than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. So let's take a step back. What is alignment? Can you be partially aligned? Can you be 30% aligned? Can you be 50% aligned? When we look at the alignment literature, we typically trace most of the alignment thinking back to the Henderson model in the early 90s. This model says or claims that the inability to realize value from IT investments is due to a lack of alignment between business and IT strategies, and that it is possible to directly align IT strategy and business strategy. And I'm going to come back to this in a second. This is the traditional thinking. I'm going to come back and make a case on why this is not possible in any organization to make this direct alignment. It sounds good. At a high level, it makes sense. But in pragmatic terms, direct alignment in most cases is not practical. So we'll come back to that thought. Now, enterprise architecture, if it's staffed appropriately and positioned appropriately in the organization, can be the bridge between strategy development and strategy execution, particularly the business architecture component of enterprise architecture. Again, if it's staffed and positioned appropriately in the organization. So these are the traditional domains of enterprise architecture that I'm sure many of you have seen many times before. We have business architecture, data and information architecture, application architecture, and then the technical or infrastructure architecture. And then most enterprise architecture frameworks attempt to understand the organization's current state in these four primary areas, and then develop a desired future state for the organization in those four primary areas. And then most of the enterprise architecture frameworks then help you get from current state to future state. So does alignment lie with strategy? Hopefully there's a good business strategy for the organization. It could be to, double your market presence or expand it in new markets, or, there's many different possible strategies. But if the strategy is clear enough, it's going to help you, or should help you, to decide between competing projects. So given option A or option B, it should be possible to refer to the business strategy and help you decide where you should be spending your time and money. But an IT strategy and all it entails, it is a pretty weighty thing to develop. But we've been conditioned to believe that the IT strategy has to align with business strategy, doesn't it? I mean, otherwise, why have an IT strategy? But it's hard, very hard, to write an IT strategy that dictates the directions of things that are expensive and hard to change, like enterprise systems, platforms, all types of IT infrastructure. You don't turn these things on quickly. They're typically multi-year implementations. They're not that easily changed in many cases. So an IT strategy is a seriously weighty thing to put together. In most industries, however, strategy is not static and tweaked as conditions on the ground changes. Then the old adage, no plan survives contact with the enemy, is alive and well in most industries and most organizations. So strategy is something that in some industries might be rapidly changing from time to time. So to add to this, Porter and others estimate that less than 5% of people in any given organization have a good understanding of what the business strategy is at that point in time. So how can you ever possibly hope to align something as weighty as an IT strategy with a business strategy that only less than 5% of the people understand at that point in time, and is in some industries maybe changing rapidly? The answer is you can't. And that's why we're no better aligned today than we were 20, 30 years ago. So what's the frame of reference for the IT strategy if it's not the business strategy? So let's look at a couple graphics. On the left-hand side, we have our traditional alignment worldview, where the business is over here, the IT is over here, and the reason we have problems is because the IT people don't understand the business. And if they could just understand the business and get closer aligned with the business, a lot of problems would go away. That's the old traditional view. A much better worldview is that IT is just another part of the business. The IT folks need to understand the business, speak in terms of the business, same as any other part of the business. I would also argue that the other parts of the business also have to have a degree of technical acumen and to be able to understand what the IT people do. I think that's not the case in many organizations, but the IT people and the business people need to be speaking the same language. I had a CIO tell me not long ago that in the business meeting I shouldn't be able to tell my IT people from the business people. So the job of the IT strategy is not to align directly with the business strategy. And we just pointed out reasons why that's not even feasible. The job of the IT strategy is to give the business as many options as possible to change tack as quickly as possible. It's a provider of capability to support strategic business capabilities. So it's a provider of capability that is aligned with the needs of the core business capabilities of the organization. So we're going to talk a lot about capabilities with business architecture, and this is really your interim alignment mechanism. So the idea is that the IT strategy is aligned with the needs of the business capabilities, and then the owners of the business capabilities are then in turn aligned with the needs and changes in the business strategy. So as business strategies change, You might need to spin up new business capabilities. You might need to change existing capabilities, or perhaps decommission capabilities that are no longer needed. So the capabilities are really the effective alignment mechanism, and it's a pragmatic and realistic approach to alignment. So what is a capability? Business capabilities, there's different definitions. This is a definition. I'm not saying this is the definition, but in general, capabilities are building blocks of the business. They represent stable business functions. They're unique and independent from each other. They're abstracted from the organizational business model. They capture the business interests. And usually you put your capabilities into something called a capability map. And we'll show you some simple examples here. This is the capabilities that make up the processes that are needed to produce a research report. So very simple example, capabilities comprise processes, and then the processes combine to produce the service or product. And then, like I said, we typically put our capabilities aligned with different processes into a capability map that might look something like this. Then from here, we might categorize our capabilities. Typically, a 3-level categorization is used. And depending on which analyst firm, they all have it's the same concept, maybe different titles, but essentially the 3 levels are at the advantage level. This is what Gartner calls the transform the business capabilities. These are your R&D capabilities. These are the capabilities that are going to provide your next generation product or services. The strategic support capabilities are those business processes you use day to day in your business, but that you would not outsource. This is kind of your secret sauce, your secret manufacturing capability, or some type of process that is really core to your business. Then the essential capabilities are those things that you need to do just to keep the lights on. These are the run the business capabilities that are oftentimes candidates for outsourcing. So then we take that 3-level categorization and we apply it to our capability map to understand where we're spending our money and what type of capabilities we have in our organization and where we're spending our money. Then you might also apply this to your budgeting and funding process. The idea is that ideally we would be spending a large percentage of our budget on our R&D capabilities. There's things that are going to position us for the future, and not as much of the budget on the keep the lights on commodity capabilities that we might outsource. In many organizations, these percentages are flipped, and you're spending a lot on the keep the lights on stuff and not as much as you should be on your R&D capabilities. But it's a good way of understanding what you have and how you're spending your money. Okay, now back to our discussion. It's much easier to sell this type of logic and strategy back to your business. So the goal of the IT organization is to provide capability and support your core business capabilities. It's not to directly align with business strategy. It's like as we just pointed out, that's kind of a fool's errand. So continuing on, you over the last 5 years or so, you're starting to see more and more articles come out supporting this notion from Gartner, Forrester, many analyst firms. So the idea is that we stop focusing on this traditional thinking around IT alignment, and it distracts the organization, and it's actually can be a negative, and focus on can actually damage the organization and damage relationships between IT and the business. So we want to stop thinking about the business as something that you need to align with, and start thinking about it as something of which IT is a part of, and not this separate thing that's out there, separate from the business. I like the last one, use the head of sales rule. If the head of sales wouldn't say it about sales, then don't say it about IT. Everybody needs to be thinking and talking in terms of the business. So we're going to show you some examples. So the next step is to move from the old alignment perspective to one that's really engaged with the business, talking about business value. So we're going to talk a little bit about value measurement at the end. It's very important to show the value to the organization, but it's really a different way of thinking than the traditional alignment mechanism. So for example, budgeting. Many IT groups tend to communicate their budgeting in terms of costs that they've saved, a utility mindset. And if you're a utility, you're a candidate for outsourcing in many cases. A more business integrated and oriented way is to think about how you're contributing to help the organization make different types of investments and capabilities, and how you can be a strategic enabler of business capabilities and get invited into the strategic discussions earlier because they see you as a strategic enabler of business capabilities, able to help turn on new capabilities and modify capabilities, and a group that really understands what capabilities the organization has and doesn't have. Another example, communication of value and how you communicate what you do to the organization. Do you communicate it in terms of how we're containing costs? If so, then if you're a cost to be contained, you may be a cost to be outsourced as well, versus how we're contributing to the bottom line and how we're contributing to revenue generation and growth of the organization. Very different mindsets and way of communicating value. One may get you outsourced. One over time will help you become viewed as more of a strategic resource. So what's the role of business architecture in all of this? This is a graphic from one of the kind of seminal books on enterprise architecture. What I like about this graphic is that it shows that enterprise architecture is really that interim layer that's often missing or not functioning well in many organizations between strategy and execution. When we say execution, it's usually in the form of project and project portfolios. And at enterprise architecture, particularly the business architecture component of enterprise architecture, is that linchpin between strategy and execution. So I'm going to go back to this traditional model of enterprise architecture, and I'm going to say it's dated. It's very dated, in my opinion, because it implies that business architecture is roughly a quarter of the equation and a quarter of the importance of the overall enterprise architecture landscape. And I'm going to argue that it's at least 50%, if not more, of the landscape and area of importance. That's what I do not like about this traditional graphic. And I think something like this might be more appropriate. Where business architecture is the foundation, if it's not done well, then everything that comes after it will not be done well. And I firmly believe that this is a more contemporary view of business architecture than the last graphic portrayed. So what is business architecture? Many different perspectives and definitions. At a high level, this, like I said, this is a definition. It's not necessarily the definition. But business architecture helps you understand your organization's business and operating model, helps you understand your organization's actionable business strategy and outcomes, helps understand market trends that impact your business and your strategy. It identifies your capabilities and a number of other things beyond capabilities, but your business capabilities and impact on the people, technology, and processes and information. This is really, it produces the key deliverables to help inform strategy and help drive strategy execution and investment in the organization. Four major parts of business architecture: the capabilities, we talked about this already, value streams, information concepts, organizational structure, and then the graphic at the bottom shows how these things come together to really link business strategy with successful actionable results or execution, which, as I said, typically comes in the form of project portfolios. I like this graphic as well because it really illustrates how business capabilities and your core business capabilities are really the heart and the center of every other part of business architecture. So these are some of the major modeling components of business architecture, and they all interrelate in one form or another with the capabilities. And at a high level, this is how business architecture can help drive strategy to execution. I don't think there's much more I'm going to say here in the interest of time. And again, more graphical representation of how business architecture helps define and understand the operating model, the business ecosystem, helps develop the business blueprints, and really provides the knowledge and ongoing process needed to link strategy and keep it linked with execution. So let's talk a little bit about project portfolio management. So a portfolio of any type is a collection of assets that you're managing, just as you would manage a financial portfolio. Everything that we do in the organization can be thought of as a portfolio of investments, and we'll show you some common portfolios here in a moment. Few definitions. Project, typically defined with a clear end date in mind, set scope. Program is usually a collection of two or more projects, and a portfolio is a group of interrelated initiatives, projects, and or programs. So a much larger organization or organizing concept. And usually, sometimes program and portfolio get confused. So the goal of portfolio management is to try to get the highest value from the investment made, and to understand the balance of risk and reward. Anytime you make an investment, there's a certain amount of risk with it, and that you've done your homework, and that you're reasonably sure, the risks and the potential or the risks justify the potential rewards. And you might categorize the items in your portfolio using the three categorization that we looked at before. So you understand which assets in your portfolio are related to running the business, keeping the lights on, which assets are related to growing the business, your daily operations, and which assets support or related to your R&D capabilities or your transforming the business capabilities. So it helps you understand also what the assets in your portfolio are primarily used for, and where they're dedicated. And as I said, there's different types of portfolios. You can have portfolios of human capital, portfolios of capabilities and processes, portfolios of assets and technology assets, and portfolios of projects. And then this is kind of a busy graphic to show how the portfolios can and often are interrelated. That an asset portfolio may spin off the need for a project to improve an asset or change an asset in some ways, and then a project portfolio may spin off new or modified assets. So it's kind of a simple example. So I think the case is becoming clear that the integration of enterprise architecture and in particular business architecture and portfolio management is needed for successful strategy execution. Now, only if business architecture is a true enterprise-wide function. I'm going to argue not reporting to enterprise architecture, but reporting to a business function. So if you talk to the Business Architecture Guild, and I'm on a board within the guild, and if you look back 7 to 10 years ago, most business architecture groups, probably 70–80%, sat under traditional enterprise architecture, which sat under traditional IT. Today, that's been flipped. Only about 30% or so of BA groups still sit under EA, and 60–70% are now under a business function, often strategic planning, perhaps innovation in some cases, but a business function. And if your business architecture positioned under an enterprise business function like strategic planning, and your scope is enterprise wide, then it does make sense to have project portfolio management roll up to you. I've seen this in just a few organizations. It's not common by any means, I realize that, but it makes a lot of sense because you're doing all this good work to link strategy. And where I see it break down in organizations is when portfolio management doesn't report up, then you're begging, you're influencing, you're trying to convince the portfolio management people to adjust the portfolio as you think it should be adjusted, and that rarely, if ever, works. And that's usually where the strategy execution piece breaks down. So if you're going to do successful strategy execution, you got to have everything from start to finish under one umbrella. And more organizations are realizing this today. Now I want to talk a little bit about business architectures as a facilitator of innovation, and we'll talk a little bit about value measurement, and then open it up for questions. So innovation is driven by different thinking, and innovation can really accelerate performance in our organizations. And that can be innovation in our products and services, or that can be internal innovation and how we might do things better internally, which is typically what we think of with business architecture, helping to identify and spur internal innovations. Some of the problems we have today is that in many cases we've been trained to manage, not innovate. So we've been trained to control, to reduce risk, to manage our resources. Versus, innovators are more, it's not reducing risk. It's, managing the risk. It's, risk is acceptable. Failure is okay if you fail fast and recover from it and learn from it. It's coping with change. It's being more visionary and strategic. But unfortunately, many of us have been trained in our educational programs to manage, but not necessarily to innovate and create. And our thinking patterns, especially those of us that come from a technical background, are often very linear. And linear thinkers typically, I hate the stereotype, but typically drive for order, seek control, love processes, avoid risk and resist change. And organizations, especially larger bureaucratic organizations, they resist change. They often, through policies, processes, and bureaucracy, drive us to some level of mediocrity. And oftentimes the innovative people get frustrated with this and may leave or get driven or kind of give up to a degree and accept a level of mediocrity. And enterprise architecture can be part of the problem, especially if you're the policy police. If the role of EA in your organization is to enforce policies, then oftentimes you are part of the problem rather than the innovative organization that you could and should be. And when we look at different types of innovation and the value that these types of innovation can have on the organization, it's pretty dramatic, the difference between effectiveness and efficiency, which is what we typically strive for or feel that business architecture and enterprise architecture produce for the organization. More effectiveness, more efficiency, maybe improving what we do. But those aren't the big benefits to the organization. It's when you get out to the right-hand side, when you're doing things differently than your competition's doing it, or when you're doing things that people thought were impossible. That's when the value really goes through the roof. But we often tend to focus more on the left-hand side with our efforts, which they're still valuable. Don't get me wrong, but that's not really where you get the tremendous big hits in the organization. And innovation isn't just about technology. It's understanding the organization, the business processes, the business model. It's as much as understanding the business as it is understanding a technology, and then of course the people component. And business architecture in particular, and enterprise architecture, could and should be a nexus for strategy in the organization. And the reason is that a well-positioned EA group or business architecture group, if it's positioned and staffed appropriately, and I keep saying that because you have to have the right vantage point to be able to see the dots in the organization, and architects often do have a unique view of the organization to see dots that others don't see. And you need to have the right people that not only see the dots, but can connect them in meaningful ways and do something with them. So I've seen many cases where people are in a position to see the dots, but either don't see them or don't connect them in innovative ways. So you got to have the combination of the right positioning and the right people. But when you do, it can be very powerful. And architects are well connected. They know the parts of the organization. Like I said, they have a view into the organization that few others have, and they can help identify like-minded people, strategic people to bring into innovation-related discussions. And they can also help with opportunity analysis and risk analysis and try to separate the wheat from the chaff and help identify which ideas should be taken to the next level. Okay, now we're going to wind up with value measurement. So this moving from the old alignment mindset to more of a business enabler, business resource or strategic resource mindset requires a difference in thinking. I like this quote: "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." And I'm going to add to that and say what you measure and how you communicate your value is what you become in your organization. Value measurements consistently cited as a top area of importance for enterprise architecture and business architecture, but it's also consistently cited as one of the lowest areas of maturity. And that's because we have a lot of different things we could measure in organizations today. Many different KPIs. You know, the analyst firms are constantly coming out with reports on exotic things you could measure and should measure. And there's just really a metrics overload today. I like this quote from The Art of War, and I don't mean to imply that your stakeholders are your enemies by any means. But let's read through this and think about it. If you know your stakeholders and you know yourself, so by this I mean, do you know who your key stakeholders are? And do you know your group, your business architecture group, and your strengths and weaknesses? So if you know this, you won't be imperiled in 100 battles. If you don't know your stakeholders very well, but you do know your strengths and weaknesses of your group, you'll win one and lose one. But if you don't know your stakeholders and you don't really know or recognize where you're strong and where you're weak in your organization, you're going to be imperiled in almost every single battle. And unfortunately, I see this in more organizations than I'd like to today. So enterprise architecture, particularly the business architecture component of EA, can help understand the C-suite priorities, but only if you understand what the priorities are and how they're measured. And like I said, there's lots of different KPIs out there. I'm not going to belabor this point. There's almost too many things you could measure. But what gets measured gets done or gets improved. So it's important that this be taken seriously, and that you just don't pick up an analyst report that says, you know, here are the top 5 or top 10 metrics for business architecture, enterprise architecture, and then you take that and say, okay, well, you know, Gartner or Forrester says we should do this, so let's use these metrics. That's a recipe for disaster, because they might be the totally wrong metrics for your organization. So like I said, problem isn't a lack of metrics, it's knowing which ones make sense for your organization and provide the most value for the effort required. So we have a methodology that we developed in the Center for Enterprise Architecture that I've used with different organizations. I'm going to describe it really fast, and then we'll get into Q&A. So the idea with this framework of the universe of things you could measure, what do your key stakeholders value and how are they measured? So understanding who are really your key stakeholders. You have many, many stakeholders, but which ones are really important? Which are your, you know, your top 7 to 10 at most? And how are they valued? Then you look at your core business capabilities and how they're valued. And then you do a Venn diagram. What KPIs, what metrics are in the middle that are of value and importance to your key stakeholders and to the owners of your core business capabilities? And then you down select a little more. Which of those metrics, which of those KPIs that are in the middle of that Venn diagram do we feel we can positively impact with business architecture, with enterprise architecture? And then from there, we want to take a look at what projects would we be able to undertake with to be able to improve those metrics. So you got to have before data, then you've got to, when you look at those KPIs, which parts of the organization that's associated with those KPIs will work with you. So you want to work with relatively, especially at first, relatively friendly parts of the organization. And the purpose of this methodology is to down select so you get maybe 5 to 7 really good KPIs that you feel you can positively impact. And when you can show that you positively impact those KPIs, you're going to impact large parts of the organization that are important, your key stakeholders and owners of the business capabilities. Once you do this and you show that you can do this on a repeated basis, then you go from being maybe a cost to be managed to being a strategic resource that's going to get invited in to strategic discussions earlier. But it's a marathon, not a race. You got to show that you can do it and that you can do it repeatedly. And then this is an ongoing process. Put governance around this. You your KPIs are going to change over time as your stakeholders change and as your business capabilities change. So that they should change over time. You shouldn't be measuring the same thing 10 years from now that you're measuring today. But you don't want to, they won't change dramatically, but over time, as the business changes and the stakeholders and the capabilities change, it makes sense that the KPIs would change as well. And then there's a whole communication aspect to this. None of this is any good if you can't communicate out what you're doing and the impact that you're making in the organization, and communicating it out to the key stakeholders and the owners of the business capabilities. So there's a lot to think about with effective communications, but that's part of this process as well. So that's real quick what's involved. It's a lot more involved than just picking up an analyst report and saying these are the 10 metrics we should use. But if you don't get this right, then it's I don't want to say game over, but it's going to put you in a serious disadvantage in your organization if you can't effectively manage, measure, and communicate your value. Okay, and like I said, this is a process. This is not a one and done. In our methodology, we suggest that you review your metrics annually with all your key stakeholders and owners of your business capabilities. Okay, I'm going to wind up with just a little bit about some of our programs at Penn State. We have many different online programs related to enterprise architecture and business architecture that might be of interest to this group. We have many master's programs. This is a subset, all fully online for working professionals. These are some, I won't go through each one, but these are some of the more common master's programs that are of interest to this community. And then in all of these master's programs, we have a variety of concentration areas. These are some of the more popular concentration areas which equate to a graduate certificate that you can take. And we have the only enterprise architecture and business architecture master's program and focus area in North America. So it's like I said, everything's fully online. So again, if you have any questions, you can go to the Penn State World Campus website and you can read about these and many other related programs that we offer. Okay. I'd like to open it up for questions now. So it's about right where I wanted to be. So we have about 15, 20 minutes for Q&A.
Excellent presentation. I'd like to start. There's a few questions I'd like to raise. The first one, you talked about IT, like the change in models going from like an alignment model to one where IT is like a department like finance, right? And yet we seem to have, or a lot of organizations seem to have a lot of respect for finance, it's their language, they sort of accommodate it. And you brought up a point, they often sort of don't give IT that respect. Is there any practical steps that you might suggest to get more towards that sort of IT as a business stakeholder as opposed to an alignment model?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts. And I'll start with saying I think our higher education system perpetuates this model. So I'll get on my soapbox for a second, because most of the IT people are found in computer science or engineering programs where they take very little, if any, business courses. And most of the business people take very little, any technical enterprise technology acumen courses whatsoever. Everything's about analytics and spreadsheets today, but we're not really teaching our business people any solid IT concepts by and large. So I think we contribute to this. But to your question, this gets to the last part of my presentation, how you measure your value of your IT organization. So you walk into IT organizations, you ask them how they're measuring value, and it's almost always around cost containment. We virtualized this many servers and we cut this cost, and that's good stuff. Don't get me wrong. It's not that you shouldn't be measuring that, but that's more for your internal use. Honestly, nobody cares outside of IT how many servers you virtualized. They want to know, how did you contribute to the things I care about? And the things I care about are more bottom line, with growing the business, growing the revenue, growing what we do. And that's why I get back to the methodology that I just presented on understanding what people value, what your key people value. And the key people, I'm going to argue, are your key stakeholders and your owners of your core business capabilities. Understanding what those groups value and how you can contribute to making what they value better, and how you can help them get better KPIs, better measurements for the things they care about. And if you can do that and show them that you understand what they do, how they do it, and how you can help them make it better, then you're a strategic resource. You're going to be somebody who they would never ever consider outsourcing, because you're helping them. You get what they do, and you help them do it better. And at the end of the day, that's the that if you can do that, then you just solved the problem that you mentioned. Unfortunately, I don't see that many people that are thinking that way yet.
That's a really good point. I've heard so many people like, oh, just take the orders, go with the rising tide, but you really do have to sort of market your successes in IT and your value, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, definitely. Otherwise, you will be seen as a cost to be managed and perhaps outsourced. If you're just an order taker, I mean, that's no fun. Who wants to be an order taker? But they'll see you as that. You gotta, and it takes good leadership too. But you got to show them that you understand the business, you understand their problems and how they're measured. At the end of the day, if you can help somebody improve how they get their bonuses, let's get real personal with this. At the end of the day, we all do as we're rewarded. So if you understand how they get their promotions, their bonuses, and you help them improve those KPIs, over time, you're going to be their best friend. So that's you have to start thinking about it.
Another question is around, in a lot of organizations, you sort of have, I guess there's really two parts to this. One is you have legacy operating systems and stuff that you need to deal with. And so there's, your systems of innovation, you've got these legacy systems, you sort of got to bring them up to date. There's been a whole bunch of methodologies that have suggested things like bimodal from Gartner and places like that. And even more from a strictly business side, you might even have different product lines competing for the same resources. Is there any advice on how you would handle that in what you're doing? Like, do you value that against the whole portfolio? Do you break that into segments? How would you handle something like that?
So how would I handle legacy system replacement?
Yeah, I guess that's the first part, is legacy system. Like, how do you deal with that when they're tied to these systems of innovation? How do they get percolated to do what you need to do, or do they? Like,
I'm not quite sure if I fully get the question. So if the legacy system is being replaced, are you saying that it can hold back innovation because it was set up for a different time, and maybe the system, the processes inherent in the system really aren't working for you? Or I'm not sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what sometimes what happens, I think, the way I would interpret that is sometimes what happens is a lot of money goes to improve the front-facing R&D capabilities that are so-called like the digital transformation, and sometimes the back-end systems are sort of ignored, even though that they're part of that and they need to be addressed, right?
Oh, okay, all right, yeah, okay, all right, I get it now. Some of the back end, kind of the office, this is more the keep the lights on systems, right? So these aren't the systems that are maybe helping you with your next generation products, but these might be your payroll systems and HR systems and things like that you need just to kind of be a functioning organization, right? That's what you're talking about.
I'm thinking, yeah, no, I'm sort of thinking more like you have, say, a website, say like an Amazon at the front end, they're putting their money in there, but you maybe have a legacy database that supports that in the back end.
Okay.
How do you deal with that, right? Given that I think a lot of the money is going to go towards, like you were saying, like the R&D, or do you percolate?
Yeah, I think so. I keep going back to understanding value, and if you can make the case that you're gonna, by giving you the resources to update some of these systems and get newer technologies, is going to help increase and make KPIs better in your organization, and you have to make a business case for it. So, and if there is no business case, then maybe it shouldn't. Maybe it's okay like it is. But you need to make an effective business case that resonates with the people that hold the purse strings, and how you're going to improve things that they care about. And if you can't do that, then maybe usually there's a business case to be made for modernization of some type. But if there isn't an effective business case, then maybe the system's not that valuable and doesn't really You know, shouldn't be
Okay.
invested in any further. You know.